As you can see, today we have this lovely looking NES sitting here on the bench. It seems to be in a mostly pretty good condition, just a little bit of griminess on the casing. And the plastic, I don't know if you're going to be able to tell here on the video, but it is a bit yellowed. We also have this other one over here, along with this Game Gear. And they all say for parts or repair only. I like how they say parts or repair, like that's our only option with these things. Like, can't do anything else. Just under $8 a piece. And this one, parts repair only as well. So the other NES, I think, is probably going to be the more interesting one. That there's probably going to be something crazy inside of it. So we're going to leave that one for another video. But for today, we're just going to take a look at this one here. It doesn't look bad. I mean, there's like nothing like really like obviously bad about it. I have a feeling they probably just like either didn't get like completely tested, or they just didn't have the stuff to test it. The slot connector, there's a little bit of corrosion on it, so we're gonna take care of that. I don't know if there's gonna be anything else in here, so this is probably just gonna be like a really quick video, unless like, you know, something kind of crazy comes up. So we're just gonna get right into it here. We're just gonna flip this over and start taking the screws out the bottom. I haven't bothered like trying to power this up and seeing if it works, just because like I can tell that you know, that corrosion in the connector is really not going to help anything. So it definitely needs to be taken care of first. As for there being like anything else inside of this thing, I have no idea. I'm hoping there's like really nothing bad about it. Worst case scenario, I do have like parts and other boards that I can use to get this thing going if I need to, but I see some spider has tried to make its home right there. You see that? All that webbing. So we'll take care of that. That's not too bad. It doesn't look horrible. It's pretty much about what you'd expect to see in a something of this, you know, old console like this. So looks pretty good. Might clean these RCAs here up a little bit. They do look like they got a bit of kind of, not corrosion, but they're just a bit tarnished. Nothing else really. Let's take the shielding off. All this shielding, it looks pretty good. There's not like any major corrosion, rust or anything on it, so I think this one was probably not kept in too horrible of conditions. Right. The cartridge slot right there, it's got a bit of griminess. Looks like maybe the cartridges they stuck in there were kind of nasty. I don't know how well it's going to come through in the video, but yeah, we'll clean that up. I mean, I'm going to take off this whole connector, and we're going to give that a really good cleaning. I'll try to get you up closer so you can see some of that corrosion. There's with the slot, like, push down latch and everything removed. So really, not a whole lot. Kind of glad that there's not like a bunch of crap down here. There's like a little crumb of something there. There's like a little casing of a dead carpet bug right there, but nothing else. So let's pull this out. Nothing much to see down here at the bottom either, just a little bit of just light dust. So as of right now, overall not too bad. Underside of the board, like spotless. It's just completely clean. There's like barely any dust or anything. Now if we take a good look at these contacts on the slot connector, you can see a lot of green corrosion right there. It's not too bad, but it is quite noticeable. And as I move down the line here, you'll see how it's just kind of spattered all over the place. Now one thing we'll notice is that there is quite a bit of corrosion like on this top connector, and that's the one that would go to the cartridge. But down here, the connector that goes to the actual edge connector on the main board, we see that, I mean, it looks fairly clean. There's like really nothing going on there. And there's not like any other corrosion present on the board or anything inside of the actual console. I got a bit of better lighting right here, so you can see how it's just kind of all the way down the cartridge slot. That one right there in the middle looks particularly kind of nasty. So yeah, what would have caused this to get so bad? But there's like nothing else inside that looks this nasty. Well, as pretty much everyone at some point has done, blowing on the cartridge is really not a good method of trying to get a cartridge to work. What happens is you blow into it, you're basically blowing a lot of moisture onto that edge connector, and then you stick it back in here. All that moisture, you know, is going to get wiped by these contacts or whatever, so, or the cartridge, you know, it's going to tarnish the cartridge slot. So blowing on the cartridges was really not something that, you know, anybody should have done. The best method of cleaning it, you know, is to take like a swab or something, and a little bit of alcohol will really not damage anything. and that would get the contacts like fairly clean, and it would work. But this is basically the consequence of blowing on the cartridge. That could explain why this thing here looks a little grimy too. And I mean, just kind of okay, you can kind of see it right there, how it's just like accumulated nastiness on that plastic. So we'll give this a good cleaning, and after we do so, we'll test it out, and I'm pretty confident that it should work fine. To begin taking care of some of that corrosion on the slot connector, I'm going to dunk this in some vinegar and just let it kind of dissolve some of that stuff away. And I found this plastic covering for something that we just recently bought, and it was like the perfect size to just kind of stick this in there and have that whole bottom connector there soak. So I'm just going to do that now. I'll put a little bit of vinegar in there, and we'll just let that work for a little bit. I'm not going to let it sit in here like for way too long of a period of time, because then it might start eating away some of the rest of the contact, and we don't want that. I will brush it a little bit with that, just to kind of help loosen it up there. And after this is done, I'm going to take this out, and I'll just stick it in an ultrasonic bath for a bit and try to get it really nice and shiny. Cartridge connector looks way better now. See, we don't have all that crap and grime all over it. Definitely much better. No corrosion. You can see on those fingers there where the cartridge has kind of worn away at the top layer of the material. As long as it's making good contact though, it should be pretty good. That one right there, that's the one that had the most corrosion on it. It took a little more effort to get that one clean, and I think the problem is that the vinegar I'm using, I don't know, it seems to be like really weak, so it just didn't break down the corrosion as well as I was hoping it would. But I was finally able to get it looking pretty decent, so that should be fine. And everything else looks pretty good. The contacts that are on the top is I mean, I try to get them as best as I could there, but the problem is you can't really access them very well because they're like so far in there. One thing about these connectors is that over time these fingers kind of eventually get bent downwards, and so they might not be making as good as a contact as they would have when they were brand new. These seem like they're okay. See how they're kind of protruding over the top of those separators in the middle there. So as long as the cartridge is able to push down on them a little bit and push up on the ones on top, I think we should be fine. You can get replacement cartridge slots nowadays that are not this sort of like a zero insertion force type slot. They're more like the ones down here that make contact with the main board, so it's all completely straight. So instead of the cartridge coming in at an angle and then getting pushed down to make contact, it just comes in straight like it would on this connector here. So that way the fingers there just basically like rub up against the edge of the connector on the cartridge, and technically they make better contact. This was just to make it easier for the user putting in a cartridge, doesn't have to like force the thing in there. The only bad thing about the cartridge slot that basically goes straight is that it would basically put more friction on that cartridge and would just kind of lead it to wear down a little faster. But I mean, technically it would definitely be better than this as far as like the reliability of the connection goes. So we're just going to stick with this though, and we're just going to try to keep this as original as possible. If I need to do anything at all, I could bend all these fingers up so that they stick up like a little bit farther up, so that when we stick the cartridge in, it makes better contact. I've done that before on one of my other consoles, and it works pretty well. I haven't really had any problems with it. Now, is this the most fabulous spiderweb you've ever seen or what? Look at all that glitter. I've given everything else a pretty good cleaning. The only thing I haven't really cleaned yet is the top cover, because I'm waiting for something on that. But everything else, the board, the cartridge slot, the mechanism, and all the shielding, it's all nice and clean now. I mean, I didn't give it like a crazy like thorough cleaning, because it's not going to be like this is a display piece or anything. It's actually going to get put to use. So I just want to make it look decent inside, and just we can test it now though. I can put most of it back together. The top doesn't need to be on for this test. Everything's kind of set up here in basically the minimal amount that we need to get it working. And the cartridge I'm going to use to test this is this Bubble Bobble 2 cartridge that I did a video on this like a couple years ago, I think now. And the reason I'm going with this first is because this is technically the newest cartridge that I have, and because it's a repro, and that board is basically fairly new. hasn't seen a lot of use, and you know, nobody's ever like blown on this, so there's like no corrosion or anything on it. So this is the cleanest cartridge that I possibly have, and so this should, you know, hopefully work on the first shot. And power. Nothing? Huh. Okay. Hopefully there's nothing else wrong with this thing. Do I need to check that? I did clean the RCAs like really well. I used some really fine grit sandpaper to clean those up. Well, that's certainly interesting. You know, sometimes I just wonder how I managed to make it through life. I didn't plug the other side of the RCA into the monitor. All right, take two. Okay, let me turn this down. This is interesting. This rolling is not the console. I just found out recently. If you guys remember when I did that 800 XL video where I was trying to get it to work, and then I got to a point where I did get something on the screen, but it was rolling upwards, and I thought it was something with the actual the board. It probably was not the board. There's something up with this monitor. Devices that output like a older NTSC signal for some reason don't sync properly. And when I did that video on the Joe and Mac SNES cartridge, I had this exact same problem. The only way I was able to get it to sync, and which I didn't show in the video because I didn't want it to drag on like longer or anything, I just got it working, is I hooked up a GameCube to it. The GameCube worked perfectly every single time. But for some reason, if the monitor had been turned off and turned back on, and I started up the SNES, it would not sync properly. I had to hook up the GameCube, that would sync, and then I would disconnect it from the cable from the GameCube, plug it into the SNES, and then the screen worked perfectly. So that's just an interesting little tidbit there. I don't know if, let's see if I disconnect the RCA here, if I can get it to work properly. I'll reconnect it. Nope. Let's see, let's let it go into standby. Nope. Let me get the GameCube out, I'll hook it up, and then we'll try it again. And I'm just going to use this to plug it into the RCA over here. I'm not going to bother with the audio on this one. Okay, video from the GameCube. And powered up. It should come up just totally fine. Yeah, see that? Working totally fine. Now I'm going to take this RCA and plug it back into the NES, and it should sync totally fine. Yeah, kind of really weird thing with this, and I was hoping that this monitor would work fine for me, you know, to be able to test things with like composite and VGA and DVI and HDMI, because it's got all those inputs in the back. But it's got an issue with older stuff and composite. But other than that, the console appears to be working totally fine. Yep, no issues there. And so, I mean, it probably would have worked on the first try if I would have made sure that the RCA was plugged into the back of the monitors. I feel like, oh man, yeah, that's terrible. But okay, we see that this is working pretty good. So let's go ahead and try one of the other cartridges, and with their, you know, kind of old worn out connectors, and see how those do. Let's do Battletoads. Okay. Perfect. So that connector is actually working fairly well. Yeah, this is working perfectly. Let's try a couple more cartridges just to see how they do. Snake, rattle, and roll. And I'm not doing anything funky here. I'm just pushing it down. Ah, this one didn't sync properly with the CIC. Ah, poo. Oh well. Let's see. Perfect. Some of these cartridges I haven't cleaned in a while, so they may not exactly work on the very first try. But once the contacts there kind of, you know, rub a little bit, they might be okay. I just gave this one like a really quick wipe down. I didn't give it like a thorough cleaning or anything, so let's see how it does. Nah, no CIC sync. Okay, this is probably going to be the more problematic of the bunch. We're getting the flashing right there on the power LED. So that's basically means that the security chip isn't working. There we go. But got that working perfectly fine. As for the top of the case, we could see that it was quite dirty. There was a lot of little dirty spots, some griminess. The rear and the right side were surprisingly pretty clean looking. We've got some dusty vents. The underside actually looked fairly clean, but I mean, not surprising since this is all inside and inaccessible. I'm pretty sure some of this stuff on here is food particles, which is kind of gross. So what I was waiting for in order to finish with the top of the case was the sun. About a month ago, I saw a video on retro recipes where Perifractics did some experiments retrobiting some cases and other things using just nothing but sun. I'll leave a link to the video down below. Man, I envy his voice. In the past, I've done retrobiting using the peroxide method along with making the paste and all that stuff, and it's worked well, but I wanted to give just the sun by itself a shot. So after an initial cleaning, the case is looking pretty good, and here you can really see the contrast between the back and the side compared against the top of the case. Whoops! So I took the case and I set it down on top of an inverted trash can, and after only about 15 minutes, there was already a noticeable difference in the case's color. It was already starting to lighten up quite a bit. And this was actually a nice sunny day, but this one cloud that came by, they had other plans. But not too bad. After about an hour, there was more noticeable brightening. 2 hours, and it was definitely starting to look lighter for sure. There's already noticeable less contrast between the top of the case and the rear and side. 3 hours later, and it's looking pretty well improved. I seriously did not think that this process would work this fast, but it did, and it was just super surprising. Later on in the day, it started to get cloudy again, but I left it out there anyways, just until the sun fully set. But the next day, it actually started off being sunny all day long, so I was able to get about 10 hours that day, which was good because for the most part, it's been pretty cloudy, like all week long. I also set the covers of the power button and the reset button. Those also needed a little bit of brightening, which is surprising because the bottom of the case really didn't look that bad, and they seem to be about the same color in plastic, so I'm guessing there's maybe just a slightly different chemical composition. The day after that, I also gave it a few hours, so in total it ended up getting about 25 to 30 hours of sunlight. Here is the final result. It looks like 100 times better than when we first started. You can see the color in the buttons there is not as bad anymore. They still have a little bit of a difference between that and the bottom of the case here, but the top looks really, really good. And if you didn't know any better, or you didn't know what to look for, you wouldn't even be able to tell that there's still a tiny bit of color difference between the top and the right side and the back. It's just very, very subtle now. You can see it almost like, if you get it at the right light, it kind of like blends in. So case is looking really good. I'm really happy about how this turned out, but of course, we didn't start off with like a complete turd or anything. So it just really needed a good cleaning and just a little bit of brightening, and looking good. I'll probably end up giving the case a little bit of a wipe down with the UV protectant just to hopefully make the color stay or last a little longer so it doesn't start yellowing too soon again. My guess is that this thing probably sat in a corner like this, and that's why this side and the back side were much lighter than the top and the front and the left side, just because this wasn't getting hit by like any light at all. So nice and clean, much happier little NES. I hope you guys enjoyed that little trip there, and thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you guys around the bench.